The salty Caribbean breeze carried the scent of rotting fish and unwashed bodies through the crowded port of Port Royal, Jamaica. Eleanor Whitmore pressed her threadbare shawl closer to her shoulders as she navigated the muddy streets, her worn leather shoes squelching with each step. The year was 1715, and the bustling harbour teemed with merchants, sailors, and those who lived in the shadows between legal trade and outright piracy. At 19, Eleanor possessed a beauty that even poverty could not diminish. Her auburn hair, though simply braided, caught the morning sunlight, and her green eyes held a determination that spoke of inner strength. She clutched a crumpled letter in her trembling hand, the final notice from her landlord. 3 days to pay £20 sterling, or face eviction from the tiny room above the bakery that had been her home since her father's death 6 months prior. Her father, Captain James Whitmore, had been a respected merchant sailor until consumption claimed his life. His death left Eleanor with nothing but debts and his modest trading vessel, the Morning Star, anchored in the harbour. The ship represented her only hope of survival, yet she lacked the crew, supplies, or knowledge to operate it profitably. As Eleanor walked along the dock, she noticed a crowd gathering around a tall man with sun-weathered skin and dark hair tied back with a leather cord. Captain Marcus Blackwood commanded attention without effort, his presence both magnetic and dangerous. His clothes, while simple, were of fine quality: a white linen shirt open at the collar, dark breeches, and polished boots that spoke of success in whatever trade he pursued. "The lady seems troubled," Blackwood observed, as Eleanor paused near the gathering. His voice carried the cultured accent of education mixed with the roughness of years at sea. Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "My troubles are my own, sir." "Indeed they are," he replied with a slight smile. "But perhaps they need not remain so. I hear tell of a young woman seeking passage or employment. The seas can be profitable for those with the right connections." The crowd dispersed as Blackwood stepped closer, his dark eyes studying Eleanor with calculating interest. She noticed the way other sailors gave him a wide berth, the subtle signs of deference in their posture. This was not merely another ship's captain. "I am Eleanor Whitmore," she said, extending her hand with practiced grace despite her circumstances. "Daughter of the late Captain James Whitmore." "Ah, Captain Whitmore," Blackwood nodded, taking her hand and bringing it briefly to his lips in a gesture both courtly and mocking. "A man of honour," they said. "Left you his ship, did he not?" Eleanor's breath caught. How did this stranger know of her inheritance? "The Morning Star, yes, though I fear it may not remain mine much longer." "Debts," Blackwood stated, rather than asked. "The curse of honest men in dishonest times. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how desperate might you be to keep your father's legacy?" The directness of his question should have offended her, but Eleanor found herself considering it seriously. The alternative to desperation was destitution, and she had seen too many young women in Port Royal reduced to selling themselves in taverns to survive. "Desperate enough to consider any honourable proposition," she replied. Carefully, Blackwood's laugh was rich and genuine. "Honourable? How refreshing. What if I were to propose marriage, Miss Whitmore? A union that would solve your immediate financial difficulties and provide you with protection in these uncertain waters." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You jest, surely." "I never jest about business," he replied seriously. "I have need of a wife for practical reasons. You have need of security. The arrangement could benefit us both. You know nothing of me beyond my name and circumstances. I know you are James Whitmore's daughter, which speaks to your character. I know you face your troubles with dignity, rather than seeking easier but less honourable solutions. I know you possess a trading vessel that, properly managed, could prove quite profitable." The final statement revealed his true interest, and Eleanor felt a chill of understanding. This man wanted her ship as much as, if not more than, he wanted a wife. "What manner of trade do you pursue, Captain Blackwood?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. His smile was enigmatic. "I pursue opportunities wherever they may arise. Sometimes those opportunities sail under flags of convenience." Eleanor understood the euphemism. In these waters, the line between legitimate privateering and outright piracy was often thin as morning mist. Yet what choice did she have? 3 days to find £20, or lose everything. "If I were to consider such a proposal," she said slowly, "what terms would you offer?" "Marriage by sunset today. Your debts cleared by morning. Joint ownership of both our vessels, with you as a full partner in all ventures." The offer was both generous and suspicious. Eleanor studied Blackwood's face, searching for deception but finding only patient waiting. And if I refuse, then you face whatever fate awaits young women alone in Port Royal. I hear the governor's new taxes have driven many to desperate measures. Eleanor closed her eyes, weighing her limited options. When she opened them, Blackwood was watching her with something that might have been respect. I accept your proposal, Captain Blackwood. Excellent, he replied, offering his arm. Shall we find a minister? The small Anglican chapel near the harbour reeked of stale incense and dampness from the tropical climate. Reverend Thomas Hartwell, a thin man with nervous eyes, performed the ceremony with unusual haste. Eleanor noticed how his hands trembled as he opened the worn prayer book, and how he avoided meeting Captain Blackwood's direct gaze. Do you, Marcus Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The Reverend asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I do, Blackwood replied with confidence that filled the small space. Eleanor wore her mother's simple gold wedding band, passed down through 3 generations of Whitmore women. The metal felt cold against her finger as Blackwood slipped it into place. She had expected to feel some emotion at this moment, fear, regret, perhaps even hope, but instead felt only a strange numbness. Do you, Eleanor Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The words caught in her throat momentarily. This morning she had awakened as a desperate spinster facing destitution. Now she stood in a chapel, pledging her life to a man she had met only hours before. I do, she whispered. By the power vested in me by His Majesty King George, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Hartwell concluded quickly, snapping the prayer book shut with obvious relief. As they signed the marriage register, Eleanor noticed Blackwood's signature was bold and flowing, suggesting education and confidence. Her own hand shook slightly as she wrote Eleanor Blackwood for the first time. Outside the chapel, the afternoon sun blazed overhead, and the harbour bustled with activity. Blackwood escorted Eleanor toward the tavern district, where he had arranged rooms for their wedding night. Captain Blackwood, a gravelly voice called from an alley between 2 warehouses. An elderly man emerged from the shadows, his weathered face marked by years of sun and salt. Eleanor recognized him as Tobias Fletcher, one of her father's former crew members. His expression was grim as he approached. Tobias, Eleanor greeted him warmly. How good to see you. The old sailor tipped his hat respectfully, but kept his eyes fixed on Blackwood. Miss Eleanor, begging your pardon, Mrs. Blackwood now, might I have a word? Blackwood's posture shifted subtly, his hand moving closer to the cutlass at his side. Speak freely, old man. My wife has no secrets from me. Tobias glanced nervously between them. Your father was a good man, Miss Eleanor. He'd want me to warn you about the company you're keeping. Mind your tongue, Blackwood said softly, but his tone carried unmistakable menace. What kind of warning? Eleanor asked, though part of her feared the answer. The Morning Star ain't the only ship Captain Blackwood's had interest in lately, Tobias continued, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. 3 merchant vessels have gone missing in these waters this month, ships that were known to carry valuable cargo. Eleanor felt her blood chill. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting your new husband ain't exactly what he appears to be, Tobias replied. The Serpent's Revenge, that's his ship. She's been seen in waters where honest traders fear to sail. Blackwood stepped forward, his movement fluid and threatening. Are you calling me a liar, Fletcher? I'm calling you what every sailor in Port Royal knows you to be, Tobias said, with more courage than wisdom. A pirate captain who preys on innocent merchants. The accusation hung in the humid air like cannon smoke. Eleanor looked at her new husband, searching his face for denial or explanation. Instead, she found only cold calculation. Tobias, she said carefully, these are serious allegations. Aye, they are, the old sailor agreed. Your father trusted me to look after you if anything happened to him. I'm trying to honour that trust. Blackwood's hand moved to rest on his sword hilt. Your concern is noted, Fletcher. Now remove yourself before I decide your counsel is unwelcome. Tobias held his ground for a moment longer, then nodded reluctantly. Mrs. Blackwood, if you ever need help, you know where to find me. He disappeared back into the alley as quickly as he had emerged. Eleanor stood in silence, processing what she had heard. Her father had always spoken of pirates with disgust, calling them parasites who preyed upon honest trade. Now she found herself married to one. Is it true? She asked quietly. Blackwood studied her face before answering. Would it matter if it were? You needed security. I needed a wife. The arrangement remains beneficial regardless of how I earn my living. His honesty, brutal though it was, caught Eleanor off guard. She had expected denial or explanation, not this matter-of-fact admission. My father would be horrified, she murmured. Your father is dead, Blackwood replied without cruelty, but with finality. The living must adapt to survive. You understood this when you accepted my proposal. Eleanor realized he was right. She had suspected his true nature from their first conversation, but had chosen to ignore her instincts in favor of desperation. Now she faced the consequences of that choice. What happens now? She asked. Now we consummate our marriage and begin our partnership, Blackwood said, offering his arm again. Tomorrow we discuss the future of your ship and our combined enterprises. As they walked toward the inn, Eleanor caught sight of the morning star in the harbour. Her father's legacy sat peacefully at anchor, unaware that it had just passed into the hands of a pirate captain. She wondered if she had saved the ship or doomed it, and whether the same question applied to herself. The inn's common room buzzed with conversation and laughter, but Eleanor felt isolated in her thoughts. She had gambled everything on a stranger's proposal, and only time would reveal whether she had chosen salvation or destruction. Dawn broke over Port Royal with the same relentless heat that marked every Caribbean morning. Eleanor stirred in the narrow bed at the Anchor Inn, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day crashed back into her consciousness. She was married to a pirate captain. The reality felt no less surreal in daylight than it had the night before. The space beside her was empty, the sheets already cool to the touch. Blackwood had risen early, leaving only the faint scent of sea salt and leather behind. Eleanor dressed quickly in her simple brown travelling dress, the only decent garment she possessed besides her wedding clothes. Downstairs in the common room, she found her husband seated at a corner table, deep in conversation with two rough-looking men she did not recognize. Their voices were low, urgent, and ceased immediately when they noticed her approach. "Good morning, wife," Blackwood said, rising with courtly manners that seemed at odds with his companions. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Eleanor replied, though sleep had been elusive. "I see you rise early. The tide waits for no man," one of Blackwood's companions said with a gap-toothed grin. He was a stocky man with arms covered in faded tattoos and scars that spoke of violent encounters, even newly married ones. Blackwood gestured to his associates. "Eleanor, meet my quartermaster, Samuel Pike, and my navigator, Willem van der Berg." The second man was tall and lean, with the pale complexion of a Dutchman and calculating blue eyes. Both men touched their foreheads in rough approximation of respect, but Eleanor sensed their appraisal. She was being measured, evaluated for weaknesses they might exploit. "Gentlemen," she acknowledged with as much dignity as she could manage. "We were just discussing today's business," Blackwood said smoothly. "Your ship requires certain modifications before it can be properly integrated into our fleet." Eleanor felt a chill of foreboding. "What manner of modifications?" Pike chuckled. "Nothing too dramatic, missus. Just making her seaworthy for our particular type of trading." "The Morning Star is perfectly seaworthy," Eleanor protested. "My father maintained her meticulously." "Your father engaged in honest trade," Van der Berg observed in accented English. "We require different capabilities, hidden compartments for cargo, reinforced hull planking, perhaps additional cannon mounts." The casual discussion of converting her father's merchant vessel into a pirate ship struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "You mean to make her into a raider?" "I mean to make her profitable," Blackwood corrected. "As I promised when we wed, your ship, combined with my crew and experience, can generate far more income than simple merchant trading." Eleanor looked around the common room, noting how other patrons avoided their table. These men radiated an aura of danger that even the hardened sailors and traders of Port Royal found unsettling. "I need air," she announced, rising abruptly. "Of course," Blackwood agreed, "but do not wander far. The harbour can be dangerous for unaccompanied women." Eleanor stepped onto the inn's covered porch, breathing deeply of the morning breeze. The irony was not lost on her. Her husband warned of dangers while planning to transform her inheritance into an instrument of those very same dangers. "Mrs. Blackwood," a familiar voice called, softly. Tobias Fletcher emerged from behind a stack of cargo barrels, His weathered face creased with concern. I hoped I might catch you alone. Tobias, you should not be here. My husband will not welcome your presence. Your husband is preparing to sail within the hour, the old sailor informed her grimly. Word is spreading through the harbour. The Serpent's Revenge is taking on supplies for a long voyage. Eleanor felt her heart sink. He said nothing of immediate departure. Pirates rarely share their full intentions, even with their wives, Tobias replied. But there's worse news. I've learned why he married you so quickly. Tell me. There's a Spanish treasure ship, the Santa Isabella, sailed from Cartagena 3 days ago, bound for Cadiz. She carries silver from the New Granada mines, enough to make 12 men wealthy for life. Eleanor understood immediately. He needs the Morning Star to appear legitimate. Spanish patrols would suspect a known pirate vessel, but a merchant ship would be allowed close enough for attack. Tobias finished. Your father's reputation for honest dealing is exactly what Blackwood needs to complete his deception. The full scope of her husband's manipulation became clear. He had not simply needed a wife for companionship or even convenience. He had needed access to a ship with an unblemished reputation, and marrying its owner was the most expedient method. What can I do? Eleanor asked, though she feared the answer. Come with me now, Tobias urged. I have a cousin in Barbados who would give you shelter until you could book passage to England. Your father had distant relatives there who might help. Eleanor considered the offer seriously. Fleeing now would mean abandoning everything. Her ship, her marriage, her future. But it might preserve her life and freedom. Mrs. Blackwood. Blackwood's voice cut through her deliberations like a blade. He stood in the inn's doorway, his expression unreadable, but his posture radiating controlled threat. I believe we have matters to discuss. Tobias stepped back, his hand moving to the knife at his belt, though Eleanor knew it would be useless against a man of Blackwood's evident skill. Indeed we do, Eleanor replied, straightening her shoulders. She had made her choice the previous day, for better or worse. Running now would only confirm her as a coward and likely result in Tobias's death. Then let us discuss them, Blackwood said, extending his hand. Privately. As Eleanor took his arm, she caught Tobias's eye one final time. The old sailor's expression was resigned but understanding. He had done his duty to her father's memory by offering escape. Now she must face the consequences of her decision alone. Walking back into the inn, Eleanor realized that her real marriage was only beginning. The ceremony had been mere formality. The true test of their union would come when she discovered whether Marcus Blackwood saw her as a partner or simply as a means to an end. The private room above the inn felt suffocating, despite the open windows that allowed the Caribbean breeze to flutter the simple cotton curtains. Eleanor sat rigidly in a wooden chair while Blackwood paced before her, his movements predatory and calculated. Pike and Vanderberg flanked the door, their presence making clear that this was not merely a marital discussion. You spoke with Fletcher, Blackwood stated rather than asked. What did the old fool tell you? Eleanor met his gaze directly, drawing strength from her father's memory. He told me about the Santa Isabella, about why you really married me. Blackwood paused his pacing, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Did he? And what conclusion did you draw from his information? That I am not your wife. I am your tool. How dramatic, Blackwood replied, settling into the chair across from her. Tell me, Eleanor, when you accepted my proposal yesterday, did you believe it was born of sudden passion? Love at first sight, perhaps? The question stung because it highlighted her own self-deception. I believed it was a business arrangement that would benefit us both. And so it is. The fact that it benefits me more than you does not negate our agreement. Pike chuckled from his position near the door. She's got spirit, Captain. Might prove useful after all. Indeed she might, Blackwood agreed, his dark eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. The question is whether she chooses to be useful willingly or requires persuasion. Eleanor felt ice forming in her stomach. What do you mean? I mean, dear wife, that the Morning Star sails within 2 hours, whether you are aboard her willingly or not. Your presence would make the deception more convincing, but it is not strictly necessary. The threat was clear. Eleanor would cooperate, or she would be left behind while her father's ship was used for piracy without her. You promised joint ownership, she said, grasping for any leverage. Full partnership in all ventures. And you shall have it, Blackwood replied smoothly, as soon as you prove yourself capable of partnership. Until then, you remain a junior partner under my guidance. Vanderberg spoke from near the window, his accented voice carrying news that made Eleanor's blood freeze. "Captain, the modifications to the Morning Star are complete. She looks every inch the honest merchant vessel, but she can now carry 20 guns instead of 6. Eleanor closed her eyes, imagining her father's beloved ship bristling with cannon. "You have defiled her." "I have improved her," Blackwood corrected. "Your father's ship was built for profit through trade. Now she can achieve far greater profits through more direct means. Through theft and murder." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Through the redistribution of wealth, from those who have too much to those who have too little. The Spanish have grown fat on gold stolen from native peoples. We merely continue the cycle." Eleanor recognized the rationalization that many pirates use to justify their crimes, but she also heard something else in Blackwood's voice, a genuine belief in his own twisted logic. "What happens after the Santa Isabella?" she asked. "Assuming your plan succeeds." "Then we become wealthy enough to retire to any port that will have us," Blackwood replied. "Or we continue raiding until the Royal Navy finally catches us. Either way, you will be far better situated than you were yesterday morning." Pike stepped forward, producing a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "Your debts have been paid, Mrs. £20 sterling to your landlord plus interest. You're free and clear." Eleanor stared at the pouch, realizing that Blackwood had honored at least part of their agreement. Her immediate financial crisis was resolved. But at what cost? "There is another matter," Vanderberg said quietly. "Tobias Fletcher has been asking questions around the harbour. Uncomfortable questions about our plans and timeline." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Has he now? How unfortunate for him." Eleanor understood the implication immediately. "You cannot harm him. He is an innocent man trying to protect me." "He is a threat to our operation," Blackwood replied coldly. "Threats must be eliminated." "Then eliminate the operation," Eleanor said desperately. "Find another way to take the Spanish ship. Leave Tobias alone. Impossible. The Morning Star is crucial to our success. The Spanish trust her reputation for honest dealing. Without that advantage, we lose the element of surprise." Eleanor realized she faced an impossible choice. Refuse to cooperate, and Tobias would die while her ship was used for piracy anyway. Agree to help, and she became complicit in whatever violence followed. "If I agree to sail with you," she said slowly, "what assurance do I have that Tobias will be left unharmed?" "You have my word as a gentleman," Blackwood replied with mock solemnity. "The word of a pirate and murderer?" "The word of your husband," he corrected, "which, in the eyes of God and English law, binds us both." Eleanor looked around the room at the 3 men who held her fate in their hands. Pike appeared eager for violence, Vanderberg seemed coldly indifferent, and Blackwood watched her with the patience of a predator confident in its eventual victory. "Very well," she said finally. "I will sail with you, but I want it understood that I am not merely cargo or window dressing. If we are truly partners, then I expect to be consulted on all major decisions." Blackwood smiled, and for the first time since their meeting, it seemed genuine. "Agreed. Welcome to piracy, Mrs. Blackwood. I believe you may find it more to your liking than you imagine." As the men filed out to prepare for departure, Eleanor remained seated, staring out the window at the harbour where the Morning Star waited. In 2 hours, she would step aboard her father's ship as part of a pirate crew, bound for an act of robbery that could end in wealth or death. She had thought marrying a stranger was the most desperate thing she would ever do. Now she realized it had only been the beginning of her descent into a world where desperation was merely the price of survival. The Morning Star cut through the azure waters of the Caribbean with a grace that belied her new purpose. Eleanor stood at the bow, watching dolphins race alongside the ship, while trying to ignore the 20 cannon now hidden behind false panels along her sides. 3 days had passed since their departure from Port Royal, and the transformation of her father's merchant vessel into an instrument of piracy felt complete. Blackwood had assembled a crew of 30 men, all veterans of the lawless trade that thrived in these waters. They treated Eleanor with cautious respect, uncertain how much authority she truly held, but unwilling to risk their captain's displeasure. She had taken to wearing her father's old coat, finding comfort in the familiar weight of the blue wool across her shoulders. "The lookout reports a sail on the horizon," Pike announced, climbing down from the rigging with the agility of a man half his age. Spanish colours flying low and heavy. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. The moment they had been sailing toward had arrived. Somewhere ahead lay the Santa Isabella, carrying enough silver to tempt men to murder. Blackwood emerged from his cabin, spyglass in hand. He had spent the voyage studying charts and questioning Eleanor about her father's trading routes and contacts. Now he moved with the focused intensity of a hunter who had finally spotted his prey. "Bring us closer, but maintain our merchant appearance," he ordered Vanderberg, who had taken over navigation duties. "Eleanor, you will need to prepare for your performance." "My performance?" Eleanor asked, though she suspected what he meant. "You are the grieving daughter of a respected merchant captain, seeking to honor her father's memory through honest trade. The Spanish will expect to see you in command, or at least present on deck." Eleanor understood the cruel logic. Her presence would make the deception more convincing, lending credibility to the Morning Star's innocent appearance. Any Spanish officer who had heard of Captain James Whitmore would expect to see his family involved in the ship's operation. As they drew closer to the distant sail, the crew began their preparations with practiced efficiency. Weapons were loaded and distributed, but kept hidden from view. The false panels concealing the additional cannon were loosened for quick removal. Men took positions that would allow them to transform from merchant sailors to pirates within moments. "There she is," Blackwood said with satisfaction, passing his spyglass to Eleanor. "The Santa Isabella, as beautiful as promised." Through the magnified lens, Eleanor could see the Spanish galleon clearly. She was indeed magnificent, three-masted and heavily built, with the distinctive high-stern castle that marked her as a treasure ship. Spanish flags flew proudly from her masts, and Eleanor could make out armed soldiers on her deck. "She carries at least 40 guns, Eleanor observed. "More than we do, even with your modifications." "Numbers matter less than surprise," Blackwood replied. "They expect to see a friendly merchant vessel. By the time they realize their mistake, we will have closed to point-blank range." Vanderberg called out the distances as they approached. The Spanish ship showed no signs of alarm, maintaining her steady course towards Spain. Eleanor realized they had probably encountered dozens of merchant vessels on their voyage, making the Morning Star just another routine encounter. "Captain," one of the crew members called softly, "they're signaling us to come alongside for inspection." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. Spanish officials would want to examine their cargo manifest and question their destination. The deception would crumble under close scrutiny. "Perfect," Blackwood said with grim satisfaction. "Signal our compliance. Eleanor, you will greet the boarding party and explain our business. Remember, you are the daughter seeking to continue your father's trading relationships." "What if they recognize the modifications to the ship?" Eleanor asked. "Then we begin the attack earlier than planned," Pike answered with anticipation. "Either way, that silver will be ours before sunset." As the two ships drew alongside each other, Eleanor could see Spanish officers preparing to board. They appeared relaxed, expecting nothing more than routine paperwork and perhaps an opportunity to purchase fresh supplies. She felt sick, knowing that their trust would lead to their destruction. "Remember," Blackwood whispered in her ear as the Spanish boat approached, "you are a grieving daughter trying to honor her father's memory. Your sorrow should explain any nervousness they might detect." Eleanor nodded, drawing her father's coat tighter around her shoulders. In a few minutes, she would either help perpetrate a massive theft or watch her husband's crew die in the attempt. The weight of her father's reputation, built over decades of honest dealing, now served as camouflage for the greatest deception of her life. The Spanish officer who boarded first was a gentleman in his 40s, with greying hair and kind eyes. He removed his hat respectfully when he saw Eleanor, clearly recognizing the significance of a woman's presence on a merchant vessel. "Captain Rodriguez of His Catholic Majesty's ship, Santa Isabella," he introduced himself in accented but fluent English. "I trust your voyage has been pleasant, Senora." "As pleasant as can be expected," Eleanor replied, forcing tears into her voice. "This is my first voyage since my father's death. I am Eleanor Whitmore. Perhaps you knew Captain James Whitmore." Recognition dawned in Rodriguez's eyes. "Indeed, I had the pleasure of meeting your father several times. A man of great honor. Please accept my condolences on your loss." Eleanor felt genuine grief mixing with her performed sorrow. Her father truly had been a man of honor, and she was about to betray everything he had stood for. But surrounded by Blackwood's armed crew and committed to their deadly masquerade, she could only play her part and pray for forgiveness. The trap was set. Within minutes, it would spring shut, and Eleanor would discover whether she had the stomach for piracy or would crumble under the weight of her father's disappointed spirit. The moment of truth arrived with the subtle hand signal from Blackwood. Eleanor watched in horror as the false panels along the Morning Star's sides dropped away, revealing the hidden cannon that had been aimed at the Santa Isabella's hull throughout their peaceful conversation. Captain Rodriguez's expression shifted from polite interest to shocked understanding in the space of a heartbeat. "Treachery," he whispered, his hand instinctively moving toward his sword. "Surrender your ship and no blood need be spilled," Blackwood announced, his own blade already drawn and pointed at the Spanish officer's throat. "Your cargo in exchange for your lives." The Spanish sailors who had boarded with Rodriguez found themselves surrounded by armed pirates who had emerged from concealment like deadly shadows. On the Santa Isabella, Eleanor could see Spanish soldiers scrambling to prepare their own guns, but the Morning Star's surprise positioning gave Blackwood's crew a devastating advantage. "You are pirates," Rodriguez said with disgust, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. "And you, Senora, dishonor your father's memory with this deception." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of facing her father's former colleague while participating in piracy felt worse than she had imagined. "Captain Rodriguez," she said quietly, "I beg you to consider your men's lives. Resistance will only lead to unnecessary death." "You speak of unnecessary death while holding us at gunpoint?" Rodriguez replied with bitter irony. "Your father would weep to see what you have become." Blackwood's patience visibly strained. "Enough sentiment. Signal your ship to stand down, or we will take her by force. The choice is yours, but the outcome remains the same." A cannon blast from the Santa Isabella provided Rodriguez's answer. The Spanish had chosen to fight rather than surrender their precious cargo. The ball whistled overhead, tearing through the Morning Star's rigging and sending splinters raining down on the deck. "So be it," Blackwood snarled. "All hands, prepare for battle!" The next few minutes dissolved into chaos that would haunt Eleanor's dreams for years to come. The Morning Star's hidden guns roared to life, sending devastating broadsides into the Santa Isabella's hull. Spanish soldiers returned fire with disciplined volleys, but their ship had been caught at a fatal disadvantage. Eleanor found herself pressed against the ship's rail, clutching her father's coat while men died around her. The acrid smoke of gunpowder burned her throat, and the screams of wounded sailors filled the air. This was the reality of piracy, not the romanticized adventure of tavern songs, but brutal violence in service of greed. Captain Rodriguez fell in the first exchange, a musket ball taking him in the chest as he tried to rally his men. Eleanor watched him collapse to the deck, his kind eyes growing vacant, and felt something die inside her own soul. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes. The Santa Isabella, despite her heavier armament, could not overcome the surprise and positioning that Blackwood had achieved through Eleanor's unwitting assistance. Spanish resistance crumbled as their officers fell and their ship began taking on water from the Morning Star's relentless cannon fire. "Quarter! We beg quarter!" came the cry from the Spanish deck. Blackwood signaled his men to cease firing. The sudden silence felt almost as violent as the battle itself, broken only by the groans of wounded men and the creaking of damaged timbers. "Board her," Blackwood commanded. "Secure the cargo and tend to our wounded. Execute any Spanish officer who refuses to cooperate." Eleanor watched in numb horror as Blackwood's crew swarmed aboard the defeated treasure ship. Within an hour, they had transferred 20 chests of silver coins and bars to the Morning Star's hold. Wealth beyond imagination, purchased with blood and betrayal. "We are rich, my dear wife," Blackwood said, finding Eleanor still pressed against the rail. "Rich enough to buy our own island if we choose." Eleanor looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "We are murderers. The blood of innocent men stains our hands." "The blood of Spanish soldiers who chose to fight rather than surrender," Blackwood corrected. "Their deaths are on their own heads, not ours. And Captain Rodriguez, he was a good man who knew my father. His death is on my conscience forever." Blackwood studied her face with something that might have been sympathy. "Conscience is a luxury we cannot afford in this business. You will learn to suppress such feelings, or they will destroy you." As the damaged Santa Isabella limped away with her surviving crew, Eleanor realized that her old life had died in the cannon smoke. The naive young woman who had married a stranger out of desperation no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, scarred by choices that could never be undone. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we divide the spoils and plan our next venture," Blackwood replied. "You are wealthy beyond your dreams, Eleanor. Try to take some satisfaction in that fact." Eleanor looked down at the silver-filled chests being secured in her father's hold. The treasure represented security, freedom from poverty, and the power to shape her own destiny. It also represented the deaths of good men and the corruption of everything her father had believed in. As the Morning Star sailed away from the scene of her first piracy, Eleanor understood that wealth gained through violence could never truly be enjoyed. She had traded her conscience for financial security, and the bargain would haunt her for the rest of her days. The poor girl who had married a pirate captain was gone forever. In her place stood a rich woman who would spend her life trying to forget the price of her prosperity.